Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Tune Yards called I Can Feel You Creep Into My Private Life. So I've got a, let's call it complicated relationship with Tune Yards, and I'm genuinely surprised the group is not more controversial among some circles, both left and right. For one, if you're looking for a band that embraces a very pronounced social justice angle in their themes and content, Tune Yards will definitely deliver. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a scattershot approach to songwriting that doesn't always do some of those ideas justice, at least as much as some people on the left would think. And that's before you get to the cultural appropriation conversation that has hovered around their aesthetic and production, despite how you would think graduates from New England art schools would be an environment for them to know better. Or let's put it another way, I don't think Who Kill or Nicky Knack would have gotten nearly the same amount of critical acclaim if they were released today in comparison with 2011 or 2014. And while I find the backlash against SJWs incredibly tedious and really quite overdone, I am self-aware enough of my own political positions to enjoy some shots at Lena Dunham when she puts her foot in her mouth and rightly deserves it. And let's get real, Tune Yards are not that far behind. Now, while I brought up all this in my review 4 years ago of Nicky Knack, the larger truth of why they haven't come up more is that I haven't given them a lot of thought. Mostly because they never brought any significant edge or potent melody to their sound that would draw me back to them. I get why a lot of critics liked them, but they were more of a critical darling. They went under the radar for a lot of people, and never really my thing to begin with. And thus, I was prepared to skip over this project altogether until I heard two interesting revelations. One, frontwoman Meryl Garbus apparently rediscovered her love for house and disco music in the past 4 years, so there could be a more defined melody to these songs. And two, apparently those cultural appropriation comments got to her, and there were apparently points where she overcorrected big time. And you can bet I wasn't gonna miss a chance to riff on some of that if it went over the top. But you know what? I'll save it for the review. What did we get on the oh so awkwardly titled record, I Can Feel You Creep Into My Private Life? Well, okay, I'm of a few minds on this. On the one hand, even despite some of my snide commentary at the opening of this, I'm firmly of the belief that the only way people learn or grow any sort of social conscience is if they're given a chance to try and make mistakes and get forgiven and try again. And it's clear that Meryl Garbus is trying really damn hard with I Can Feel You Creep Into My Private Life. On the other hand, the same slapdash effort that characterized previous Tune Yards records and their content is sadly just as present here, which leads to some real cringe-worthy moments that I'm not sure the compositions elevate or save. Some people have already made the Macklemore comparison for this brand of overcompensating wokeness, but you know what, say what you will for Macklemore, at his most conscious and earnest, he made the effort to make it more than just about him and his place in hip-hop, actively willing to step back to elevate others, something that I'm not sure Meryl Garbus would do to the same degree, and that's a bit of a problem. And to explain all this, I want to reference a controversial song from last year from Jason Isbell and the 400 unit, White Man's World. In that song, Jason Isbell doesn't mince words surrounding an acknowledgement of the privilege he has as an artist right now, but he does so in service of the hook that will call out the dismantling of power structures that were propagating that privilege, as well as an acknowledgement that not only how it might not succeed all of his efforts, but even if it does succeed, it will be his wife and daughter who will receive the most, not him. He will lend his voice to the struggle, sure, but he's not the one to lead this fight. It's a nasty, uncompromising song that rocked the country world more than many people will admit, especially in the indie scene, and it also damn near made my list of the best songs of 2017 for the record. There were just too many songs from the Nashville sound that made it ahead of it. But what I want to highlight here is the framing, because Jason Isbell gets that his angst isn't what matters in this particular cultural conversation. It's there, it matters to him, but in the larger picture, not really. And if you're looking for the foundational reason why Meryl Garbus's similar on the surface commentary hits some cringeworthy territory, is that she doesn't grasp that. And that means her examination of her white privilege plays out with increasingly broad, increasingly self-focused self-flagellation that I'm not sure anybody privileged or not wants or needs to hear. Again, on the surface, Meryl Garbus calling out systemic inequality or conspicuous consumption or how white supremacy hurts everybody, those are fair and often right points to make, but it's the framing of these points that falls in really frustrating or problematic territory. Part of this is the fact that Meryl Garbus chose to embrace more disco and house textures means that there isn't really the same room for lyrical nuance and percussion-heavy dance floor jams. Kind of ironic as she swaps out one historically black art form for two others, but that's neither here nor there, and you get the feeling she's trying to make commentary on it and doesn't really stick the landing. But you know what, the larger part of it is that Meryl Garbus is willing to admit she is a people pleaser, and she doesn't always grasp the subtler nuances of the subjects that she's targeting. So maybe it's not the best idea to tackle this content in a way where it seems like she's constantly got one eye on the audience begging her for her social conscience to be elevated and then tacking on half-hearted excuses for why it wasn't there in the first place. Hell, it's as early as the first song, Heart Attack. The confrontation where it begins, she highlights how she's only human, with the next song seeing extremes on both sides of the political spectrum, and on ABC 123 saying that all she knows is white centrality. And in the back half of the record we get lines on Home like came to get down, but you're not telling my story, man. Which in the annotations on Genius, Meryl Garbus flat out admits that she wants to own those lines about her talking about her art, even despite the rest of the song calling her a fool. That's the awkward thing about the self-awareness on this project. For as much as she wants to eviscerate her own privilege and ego on songs like Now As Then and Honesty, especially the excruciating song Colonizer, she's trying to balance it so she remains at the center of the narrative, which doesn't help her cause here. Hell, the closer Free is all about how she's also a victim of white supremacy and now she's woke to it, seemingly unaware of that by not taking any real confrontational stance and a slew of ego-focused half measures across the project, she's likely not to face any consequences going left or right. And you know what? That's not even getting into the execution of all this, which swamps out much of the African percussion for jittery, jagged samples of synth, choppy vocals, blubbery bass lines, glitch that detracts more from these mixes than helps them, and house tones that could have been pulled from a D-Light record in the mid-90s, a lot of the politics and all. I'll say it, it's actually a little bit stunning how the tones across this album don't really sound all that challenging or eclectic or experimental in comparison with a lot of 90s house and pop. And with less of a focus on hooks to instead focus on the message, which is why I started with that, it's hard not to feel like this record will suffer in terms of its tunes. Now, I will say this for Tune Yards, if you can ignore all the lyrics, and songs like Colonizer make this damn near impossible with all the references to a white woman's hair and a white woman's tears and a white woman's voice, there are some solid grooves you can look past all that. I like the windswept gleam and the sharper beat of Coast to Coast. Heart Attack does have some unstable percussive momentum, and Hammer, it's probably the best song here for its sharper keys and horns, a song that she ironically didn't want to include, as well as a hook that feels more grounded and direct in its politics, and how it transitions into Who Are You with the reggae-inspired synths augment the flutes and horns, especially that sax solo. It's a good 1-2 punch there. But on the flip side, whenever Tune Yards tries to bring in glitchier or more atonal elements, it's nearly always a misfire. From the ugly breakdowns on Now As Then and Honesty to the dissonant, gurgling glitch of Colonizer. And yes, I get that that song was using the African vocal lines to emphasize Garbus's guilt, but for as much as you want to avoid cultural appropriation comparisons on this album in particular, using the same sonic palette kind of defeats your own point, especially when you continue to do so regardless on songs like Private Life. And Free was just a painful way to end this record, all synthesized vocals keening at precisely the right tone to give me a splitting migraine. I know parts of this album are supposed to be atonal, but man, not in this way. But you know what, going back to Private Life, where I want to tie all this together is a reference that Meryl Garbus makes to Ladysmith Black Mambanzo, a South African gospel group elevated to mainstream prominence thanks to their collaboration on Paul Simon's landmark 1986 record Graceland, which was incredibly controversial at the time for a lot of similar conversations about cultural appropriation. Yeah, it was still a thing in the 80s. Hell, maybe even more so given that Simon had gone to Johannesburg to record with black musicians who he would bring on tour, elevating their voices to measurable success, but also potentially breaking the cultural boycott in South Africa still in the throes of apartheid. And that's not even getting to the political dimensions. There's some complicated subject on around Graceland. And you know what here? Meryl Garbus wants to hear the voice of a band that inspired her, one that she probably would never have heard without Paul Simon's elevation of the group, and then she wants to elevate their voice over hers. It's a moment reflecting nuance that many critics have claimed Tune Yards and Meryl Garbus have always had, and showing both the social justice cause that she wants to support and the allure of the system that's placed against it. And yet an execution here ring really hollow for me, because not only across this record does she not do what Simon did in any sort of cultural exchange to elevate other artists, not only is the song framed around what it can deliver to her private life, but it embraces elements of the same aesthetic for which she was castigating herself earlier on this record for appropriate appropriating. In other words, while I understand what Tune Yards was trying to do with this, the amount of white guilt poured onto it, this album feels less about the causes once triumphed and more about a self-serving, painfully awkward, deconstructed ego filled with half measures and tunes that are nowhere sharp or colorful enough to save it. For me, this only gets an extremely light 5 out of 10 because I can respect good intentions and there are a couple good songs here, but I've got no idea who the audience is for this album as a whole. Maybe that die-hard white liberal lacking any sort of self-consciousness and who never shuts the hell up could find some catharsis from this, but considering it didn't click for me and how much I fall in that vein, wouldn't put money on it. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine how this review won't be controversial. Just have fun in the comments. I don't really care at this point. You guys want to buy the record, links in the description below. The poll's there for you all to tell me how wrong I am. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. You can keep all the insults down to a minimum. I'm probably not going to read all that many of them. Beyond that, if you guys want to support this channel so I don't have to cover stuff like this, actually I didn't mind covering stuff like this, but just got excruciating, or if you want to have an impact on my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. You want to see the schedule, it's on my Instagram, link to that below, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.